6 months after signing the divorce papers, Kevin got the call he never expected. "Sir, she just gave birth prematurely, and she named you as the father." His heart raced. Julia, the woman he let go. She was pregnant when they got divorced, and he never knew. Now she was in a hospital bed, fragile and vulnerable, holding the baby that would change everything between them. He knew that once he walked through that door, there would be no turning back. Some loves don't die. They just wait for the right moment to be reborn. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, one of those ordinary autumn afternoons when the New York skyline looked like brushed steel against a pale sky. Kevin Montgomery was sitting in his glass-walled office on the 43rd floor, surrounded by the hum of success. Italian leather chairs, polished mahogany desk, the subtle aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the expensive cologne he wore. He was reviewing acquisition reports when his cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something, instinct perhaps or fate, made him swipe his finger across the screen. "Mr. Montgomery?" The voice on the other end was calm, clinical, female. "This is Dr. Patel from Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about Julia Montgomery." His chest tightened instantly. Julia. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in months, though it echoed in his mind every night before he fell asleep. "What happened?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, his hands suddenly clammy against the cold leather of the chair. "She gave birth prematurely this morning. The baby is in the NICU but stable." "Mr. Montgomery," the doctor paused, and Kevin felt the world slow down around him. "She named you as the child's father. We need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible to sign some documents and, well, she asked for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs, the distant ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall, the muffled murmur of the city below. 6 months. They had divorced exactly 6 months ago. He had signed the papers in a cold law office, watching her signature, delicate, slanted, drying on the page next to his. She was pregnant, and he didn't know. "I'm on my way," he said, hanging up before the doctor could add anything else. Kevin stood still for a moment, staring at his distorted reflection in the glass. A 38-year-old man, dark hair perfectly styled, $3,000 grey suit, Italian silk tie. On the outside, he was the picture of control. On the inside, he was falling apart. Julia. She had always had this effect on him, from the first day he saw her at an art gallery in Soho 5 years ago. She wore an emerald green dress, her brown hair falling in waves over her bare shoulders, and she was laughing at something someone had said. But when their eyes met across the crowded room, the laughter died on her lips. And Kevin knew, in that instant, that his life would never be the same. They got married 9 months later. Too fast, everyone said. Too intense. But Kevin never did anything halfway. And Julia was everything he didn't know he needed. She was art where he was business. She was emotion where he was logic. She was the color missing from his monochromatic life. But somewhere between business trips, late nights at the office, and conversations that turned into silences, they lost each other. He worked more. She withdrew. Arguments became sharp whispers. And then, one cold April morning, she placed the divorce papers on the breakfast table and said simply, "I can't live like this anymore, Kevin. You chose your empire, and I need to choose myself." He didn't fight. Maybe he should have fought. Now, as his driver sped through Manhattan's congested streets toward the hospital, Kevin felt the weight of every mistake he had made. The meetings he prioritized over dinners, the calls he took when she needed him. The times he chose work instead of simply being present. And now she had a child. His. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and wilted flowers. Kevin crossed the marble lobby, his shoes echoing on the spotless floor. A nurse guided him through white corridors to the 5th floor, where the maternity ward exuded a heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional cry of newborns. "Room 512, the nurse said softly. pointing to a half-open door. Kevin stopped at the entrance, his hand on the cold doorknob. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. He took a deep breath, the sterile air filling his lungs, and pushed the door open. Julia was lying in the hospital bed, her face paler than he remembered, but still devastatingly beautiful. She wore that light blue hospital gown that made her look fragile, vulnerable. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, a few loose strands framing her cheeks. She was sleeping, her chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Kevin took 3 steps into the room and stopped, unable to move further. He simply watched her, the curve of her eyelids, the shape of her parted lips, her pale hand resting on the white sheet. Then, as if sensing his presence, Julia slowly opened her eyes. Their gazes met, and the world seemed to stop. There was surprise there, relief, hurt, longing, all at once, dancing in her brown eyes that he knew so well. "Kevin," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. He swallowed hard, unable to find words. Finally, he forced himself to say, "Julia, the doctor called me." "I know." She tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Instinctively, Kevin moved closer, his hands reaching out to help her. His fingers brushed her arm, a brief, electric touch, and both of them froze. The tension in the room was palpable, thick as fog. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than he intended, loaded with months of confusion and pain. Julia looked away, staring at the window where the afternoon was beginning to darken. "Because I found out 2 weeks after we signed the papers, and you had already moved on, Kevin. Closing million-dollar deals, traveling the world." Her voice trembled. "I thought you wouldn't care." Wouldn't care. Kevin felt something break inside him. He knelt beside the bed, forcing her to look at him. "Julia, how could you think that?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "Because you never chose me, Kevin. Never. Why would it be different with a baby?" The words hit him like a punch. Because she was right, and he knew it. He reached for her face slowly, his fingers trembling as they gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was light, almost reverent. Julia held her breath, her eyes widening slightly. "Where is he?" Kevin asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Our son. Where is he?" "NICU. He was born at 32 weeks. A tear rolled down her cheek. "He's so small, Kevin. So fragile." Kevin wiped the tear away with his thumb, the gesture instinctive, intimate. For a moment they stayed like that, him kneeling beside the bed, his hand on her face, their gazes locked on each other, all the months of distance evaporating like mist in the sun. "Take me to him," Kevin said finally. And as Julia slowly nodded, they both knew that nothing would be the same as before. Because some encounters aren't just reunions, they're new beginnings in disguise. The NICU hallway had a different kind of silence than the rest of the hospital. It wasn't empty, it was full of waiting, of whispered prayers, of fragile hopes hanging in the air, like crystals about to shatter. Kevin walked beside Julia, who moved slowly, still weak from childbirth. He wanted to offer his arm to hold her, but he didn't know if he had that right. Then she stumbled slightly. Without thinking, his hand flew to her waist. Firm, protective. Julia leaned against him for just a second, long enough for Kevin to feel the warmth of her body through the thin fabric of the hospital gown, long enough for memories to flood his mind. Lazy Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee and her skin, the perfect weight of her nestled against his chest. "Sorry," she murmured, pulling away quickly, her cheeks slightly flushed. "You don't need to apologize," Kevin replied, his voice lower than he intended. They continued in silence until they reached a glass door with a sign, "Neonatal ICU, parents and guardians only." A gentle-eyed nurse greeted them, asking them to wash their hands and put on sterile gowns over their clothes. Kevin shoved his arms into the disposable gown, his fingers clumsy. He had closed billion-dollar deals without trembling, but now his hands wouldn't stop moving. Julia was watching him. "You're nervous." It wasn't a question, it was a soft observation, almost tender. "Terrified," he admitted, meeting her eyes. Something changed in Julia's expression. The hardness she'd maintained around him since waking softened slightly, revealing the woman he'd known, the one who laughed easily and loved deeply. I was too. The first time I saw him. She took a deep breath. But when you look at him, everything makes sense, Kevin. The nurse guided them through rows of incubators, each containing a tiny baby connected to wires and tubes. Kevin felt his chest tighten with each step. Then she stopped in front of an incubator in the corner, near the window where golden late-afternoon light streamed in. "Alexander," Julia whispered. Kevin approached slowly, as if approaching something sacred. And then he saw him, his son. Alexander was extraordinarily small, no bigger than a doll, with skin so thin that Kevin could see delicate veins like traces of blue ink. A thin tube was attached to his tiny nose. Sensors taped to his narrow chest blinked with green and red lights. He wore only a diaper the size of Kevin's palm and a light blue cap, but he was perfect. Kevin felt something break inside him, not from pain, but from love. Fierce, immediate, devastating love. He placed his hand against the warm glass of the incubator, his fingers spreading as if he could reach through the invisible barriers and protect this little being from anything that could hurt him. "You can touch him," the nurse said gently, opening the small side ports. "It's important. Premature babies need their parents' touch." Kevin hesitated, looking at Julia. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. With trembling hands, Kevin slid his fingers through the opening. The inside of the incubator was warm, humid. He touched Alexander's little arm with his index finger, so lightly, afraid of breaking something. And then it happened. Alexander's tiny fingers closed around Kevin's finger with surprising strength. Firm, confident, as if to say, "You're my father, and I'm here." Kevin felt tears burn his eyes. He blinked quickly, but one escaped, rolling down his cheek. He hadn't cried since he was a child. Didn't cry at the wedding, didn't cry at the divorce. But now, feeling that small grip, he couldn't stop. "Kevin." Julia's voice was loaded with emotion. He looked at her. Tears were rolling freely down her face too, but she was smiling, a tremulous, genuine smile. She moved closer, standing beside him, so close their shoulders touched. "He has your eyes," she whispered. "They don't open much yet, but when they do, they're yours." Kevin couldn't speak. He just kept looking at Alexander, at the miracle he had helped create and almost lost, without ever knowing. They stood there for long minutes side by side, watching the baby's chest rise and fall, the numbers on the monitor blinking steadily. The world outside kept spinning, deals being closed, traffic jammed, people rushing. But there, in that small space between the incubator and the window, time stopped. "Why, Alexander?" Kevin finally asked, his voice hoarse. Julia smiled faintly. "It means defender of humanity. I thought he would need to be strong, brave." She paused. "And I wanted him to have something that didn't come from you or from me, something just his." Kevin nodded slowly, understanding. "It's perfect." They stayed another 15 minutes before the nurse gently said that Julia needed to rest. Kevin withdrew his finger slowly, feeling the immediate loss when Alexander let go. He wanted to stay there forever, but he knew he couldn't. As they left the NICU and walked back down the hallway, reality began to return. The divorce, the months of silence, the distance they had created. But something had changed. When they reached the door to Julia's room, she turned to him. They were very close, closer than they should be. Kevin could see the small golden flecks in her brown eyes, smell the soft perfume she always wore, the one that smelled like jasmine and something sweeter he could never identify. "Why didn't you tell me before?" The question came from him again, but this time without accusation. Just raw, exposed pain. Julia bit her lower lip, a nervous habit he knew well. "Because I thought you wouldn't care, Kevin. Our marriage ended because I was never a priority. How could I believe a baby would be?" The words cut deep, but he couldn't argue. She was right. He had chosen meetings instead of dinners, trips instead of weekends together, ambition instead of love. "You're right," he said simply. "I chose wrong. Every time." Julia blinked, surprised by the admission. Kevin took a step closer, leaning slightly against the wall beside her door. She stood before him now, so close he felt her breath touching his. His heart beat erratically. "But I'm here now," Kevin continued, his voice low, intense. "And I'm not leaving, not from you two." "Kevin," she began, but he saw the hesitation in her eyes, the internal struggle between what she felt and what she feared. "I know I messed everything up," he interrupted gently. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "But Julia—" He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't pull away. His fingers touched her face, gently brushing away a strand of hair that had escaped from the bun. The touch was light, but loaded with everything they hadn't said: regret, longing, desire, fear. Julia closed her eyes for a moment, leaning imperceptibly into the touch. When she opened them again, they were bright with tears. "You hurt me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know." Kevin brought his face closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it, if you'll let me." The silence between them pulsed, heavy, full of possibilities. Julia took a shaky breath. "I need to rest." "I know." But he didn't move. Neither did she. They stayed like that. Breaths intertwined, hearts beating in the same frantic rhythm, the space between them vibrating with unresolved tension. Finally, Julia took a step back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Kevin." "Good night, Julia." She entered the room and closed the door softly. Kevin stood in the hallway for a long moment, his hand still tingling where he had touched her face, and as he walked toward the elevators, he knew with absolute certainty he hadn't lost her yet. There was still time, there was still hope, and he wouldn't waste this second chance. Kevin didn't sleep that night. He returned to his apartment in Tribeca, a minimalist space of white walls, modern furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed Manhattan glittering like fallen constellations. It was too quiet, too empty. For the first time since the divorce, Kevin felt the crushing weight of the loneliness he had chosen. He stood in front of the window, holding a glass of whiskey he had no desire to drink, watching the cars below move like illuminated ants. His mind kept returning to that moment in the NICU, Alexander's tiny fingers gripping his finger, the feeling of absolute purpose he had never experienced in any boardroom. And Julia. Always Julia. The way she looked at him when he admitted his mistakes. The way she leaned into his touch, even while fighting against it, her breath brushing against his in the hallway. At 3 in the morning, Kevin gave up pretending he would sleep. He showered, put on jeans and a casual shirt, something he rarely wore, and drove back to the hospital through New York's deserted streets. The city never completely slept. There were always yellow cabs cutting through the darkness, neon lights reflecting in puddles of recent rain, the smell of pretzels and subway smoke rising from the grates in the ground. When he arrived at the hospital at 4:30 in the morning, the night receptionist recognized him and waved, allowing him entry. Kevin went up to the 5th floor, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridors. The NICU had a 24-hour access system for parents. Kevin signed the visitor's book, washed his hands meticulously, and put on the disposable gown. The night shift nurse, a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, smiled when she saw him. "First night as a father?" she asked gently. Kevin nodded, unable to speak. "It's scary," she said, guiding him to Alexander's incubator. "But you'll find that love overcomes fear, it always does." Alexander was awake, or at least his eyes were half closed in small slits, as if he were trying to understand the world around him. His tiny arms moved in uncoordinated gestures, his little fingers opening and closing as if searching for something to hold. Kevin pulled a padded chair beside the incubator and sat down, placing his hands through the side openings. The humid warmth inside enveloped him. He gently touched Alexander's palm, and again those tiny fingers closed around his with surprising strength. "Hi, little one," Kevin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's me, your father." The words sounded strange in his mouth. Father. He was a father now, responsible for this fragile life, for this heart beating beneath skin as thin as tissue paper. "I'm sorry I wasn't here from the beginning," Kevin continued. as if Alexander could understand him. "But I promise I'll make up for it. I promise I'll be better than I was with your mother. I promise you'll always know you're loved." The tears came back, silent this time, rolling down his cheek as he watched Alexander's tiny chest rise and fall with the help of the respirator. The monitors emitted soft, steady beeps, the most beautiful sound Kevin had ever heard, because it meant his son was alive, was fighting. Kevin stayed there for an hour, just holding that little finger, talking quietly about insignificant things and profound promises. He talked about how he would take him to see baseball games, teach him to swim in the summer, read bedtime stories. He talked about regrets and second chances, about how sometimes men need to lose everything to understand what really matters. And as he spoke, something inside him reorganized itself. The priorities he had built over years, business, money, power, suddenly seemed empty compared to this, compared to holding his son's hand. "You're my new empire," Kevin whispered. "You and your mother. You two are everything now." That's when he heard it. A soft breath behind him. Kevin turned and saw Julia standing a few feet away, wrapped in a light blue hospital robe, her hair loose falling over her shoulders. She held a cup of water with both hands, as if she needed something to anchor herself. Her eyes were red. She had been crying, or perhaps still was. "How long have you been there?" Kevin asked gently. "Long enough," she replied, her voice trembling. They stared at each other through the dim light of the NICU, illuminated only by the soft lights of the incubators and the monitors glowing in the dark. Kevin stood slowly, not completely letting go of Alexander's hand. "You heard?" He wasn't ashamed. Every word he said was true. Julia nodded, a new tear sliding down her cheek. "I heard." She approached, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. When she reached his side, she stood so close that Kevin could feel the warmth of her body, the smell of lavender soap the hospital provided. "Kevin," she began, but her voice failed. He waited, giving her time. "I wanted to believe you would change," Julia finally said, looking at Alexander instead of at him. "During our marriage, I kept waiting for the day you would wake up and realize we had something worth more than any deal. But you never did. And when we signed those papers," she swallowed hard, "I thought I had closed that chapter, that I had made peace with the fact that you would never be the man I needed." Kevin felt each word like a blade. "But then," Julia continued, finally looking at him, "I see you here, at 4:30 in the morning, talking to our son like he's the center of the universe, and her voice broke. "I don't know what to feel, Kevin." He turned completely toward her now, leaving Alexander for just a moment. They stood face to face, so close that Kevin could count the pale freckles on her nose, see the small worry lines on her forehead. "Feel anger," Kevin said softly. "Feel hurt. Feel everything you need to feel, Julia, but also feel this." He carefully took her hand and guided it to the incubator opening, placing it together with his over Alexander's small chest. The baby's heart beat beneath their palms, fast, strong, determined. "We made this," Kevin whispered, "together. And maybe we destroyed our marriage, maybe I destroyed it, but we created something perfect. And Julia," he gently squeezed her hand, "I want to be here, not just for him, for you too." Julia closed her eyes, tears falling freely now. "Till you hurt me so much." "I know." Kevin leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers, as they had stood in the hallway the night before. "And I'll spend every day proving that I've learned, that I've changed." "What if you haven't changed?" Her voice was just a frightened whisper. "What if this is just the moment, Kevin? What if 6 months from now you go back to being the man who chooses meetings over families? Then you remind me of this." Kevin raised his free hand and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her tear-dampened cheek. "You remind me what matters. You keep me honest. Because without you both," he shook his head, "I'm nothing." Julia opened her eyes, and Kevin saw something there he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Fragile. Cautious. But alive. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," he confessed. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, hands intertwined over Alexander's chest, breath synchronized. The world outside was beginning to wake. Kevin could see the first lights of dawn painting the sky through the window in shades of pink and gold. "Stay today," Julia whispered. "Stay with us. There's nowhere else I'd rather be." And when Julia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, Kevin closed his eyes and simply felt. Felt her weight, felt her breathing, felt Alexander's small heart beating beneath their hands. For the first time in years, he was exactly where he should be, and he wasn't going anywhere. The following days turned into a routine that neither of them had planned, but both accepted as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Kevin cancelled all his meetings, something his executive assistant received with shocked silence on the other end of the line. He let his partners handle urgent operations and simply disappeared from the corporate world. For the first time in 15 years, Kevin Montgomery was unavailable. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. He split shifts with Julia at the hospital. When she needed to rest, he stayed with Alexander. When she insisted on being present, he brought fresh coffee, still warm croissants from a French bakery in Brooklyn she used to love, and sat beside her in comfortable silence. The nurses began to recognize them as the couple from Incubator 7, a title neither of them corrected, though technically they were no longer a couple. But the lines were getting blurred. It was a Tuesday night, almost 10 o'clock, when Kevin arrived at the hospital carrying an insulated bag. Julia was sitting beside Alexander's incubator, her shoulders curved with exhaustion, her eyes fixed on their son as if she could keep him alive through sheer force of will. "Did you eat today?" Kevin asked gently, approaching. Julia didn't even look at him. "I had something at lunch. That was 9 hours ago." He knelt beside her, opening the bag. The smell of butternut squash soup with ginger, her favorite, filled the small space. "I brought it from Sakura. Remember that place where you said they made the best soup in the city?" Her eyes finally shifted from Alexander to him, surprise evident on her face. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you, Julia." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was just a fact, said with the simplicity of someone telling the truth. She accepted the container with trembling hands, and Kevin noticed for the first time how fragile she looked. There were deep circles under her eyes, her skin too pale, her lips chapped from dehydration. "When was the last time you really slept?" he asked, concern coloring his voice. "I don't know." Julia took a spoonful of soup, briefly closing her eyes as she savored it. "I think since he was born. Every time I close my eyes, I'm afraid something will happen and I won't be awake to—" Her voice failed, but Kevin understood. The fear that Alexander would stop breathing. The fear that the monitors would start beeping wrong. The primal fear of losing something too precious to name. "I'll stay," Kevin said simply. "You'll sleep for a few hours, and I'll keep an eye on him. I promise if anything happens, I'll wake you immediately. Kevin, you don't have to. I want to." He placed his hand over hers, warm against her cold skin. "Please, let me do this for you." Julia looked at him for a long moment, searching for lies, for empty promises. But all she found was raw sincerity. "Okay," she finally whispered. After finishing the soup, Julia lay down on the foldable sofa bed the hospital had provided in the corner of the room. Kevin covered her with a thin blanket, his fingers accidentally brushing her shoulder. She shivered slightly at the touch, but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes already closing from exhaustion. "Sleep, Julia." Kevin returned to the chair beside Alexander, pulling out a laptop he'd brought. He had emails to answer, contracts to review. But as he looked at the bright screen and then at his sleeping son in the incubator, he simply closed the computer. Some things were more important. He spent the following hours just watching Alexander, the way his tiny nose occasionally twitched, how his little arms stretched in mysterious baby dreams, how his chest rose and fell with mechanical help, but also with his own determination. Around midnight, Julia began to move restlessly. Small sounds escaped her, soft moans of distress. Kevin got up and approached, realizing she was having a nightmare. "Julia," he called softly, lightly touching her shoulder. She woke with a start, eyes wide, heart visibly racing. "Alexander, he's fine," Kevin reassured her immediately, pointing to the incubator where the monitors glowed steadily. "Everything's okay, you were dreaming." Julia covered her face with her hands, breathing deeply to calm herself. When she lowered them, Kevin saw they were damp with tears. "Sorry," she whispered. "I dreamed that I lost him." "Hey." Kevin sat on the edge of the sofa bed, too close to be just cordial, close enough for their knees to touch. "He's here. He's strong. He's fighting." "I know." But her voice trembled. "But what if it's not enough, Kevin? What if he's too small, too weak? What if—" "No." Kevin took her hands in his, warming them. "Don't think like that. He's your son. Our son. And if there's one thing I've learned about you, Julia, it's that you're the strongest person I know. He has that in his blood." Julia let out a wet laugh, half cry, half relief. "I don't feel strong. You gave birth alone. You survived a divorce. And you're here, day after day, fighting for him." Kevin squeezed her hands. "That's strength, Julia. Real strength." She looked at their intertwined hands, then at his face. There was something different in her eyes now. Something softer, more open. "You're here too," she said quietly. "Every day. Every night. There's nowhere else I should be." The silence between them was dense, loaded with everything they weren't saying. Kevin could see her internal struggle, the desire to trust against the fear of being hurt again. "Your shoulders are tense," he observed, changing the subject before the moment became too heavy. "You need to relax or you'll end up with terrible pain. It's hard to relax when—" Julia gestured vaguely at everything. The hospital, the incubator, the impossible situation they found themselves in. "I know." Kevin hesitated, then said, "Turn around." "What?" "Turn around. Let me help." Julia stared at him with distrust, but eventually turned, giving him her back. Kevin positioned his hands on her shoulders, immediately feeling the tension in her muscles. She was rigid as stone. "Breathe," he instructed gently, beginning to massage with slow, firm, careful movements. Julia let out a long sigh, her shoulders gradually yielding under the pressure of his hands. Kevin worked on the knots of tension, his fingers knowing every curve, every tense muscle. He had done this hundreds of times during their marriage, after long days, stressful nights, whenever she needed it. But now it was different. Each touch seemed more loaded, more significant. His hands moved from her shoulders to her upper back, finding tension points and dissolving them with firm pressure. Julia tilted her head forward, exposing her nape, and Kevin had to fight the impulse to lean in and kiss that vulnerable space. "This is—" Julia began, her voice hoarse. "This is good. You always carried everything on your shoulders," Kevin murmured, his fingers working in slow circles. "Even when you didn't have to. Old habit. Bad habit." His hands moved up again, his thumbs tracing the line of her spine to the base of her neck. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Julia. Not anymore." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "You were always good at this. At this? At making me feel cared for." There was melancholy in her voice. "When you were present, you were perfect. The problem was, you rarely were." The truth hurt, but Kevin didn't argue. "I'm here now. For how long?" The question came out before she could stop it. Kevin stopped massaging but didn't remove his hands. They rested on her shoulders, warm and firm. "For as long as you'll let me." Julia slowly turned to face him, and Kevin realized how close they were. Their faces were inches apart, breaths intertwined, the world reduced to just the two of them on that small sofa bed. "I can't handle being hurt again," she whispered, raw vulnerability in every word. "I know." Kevin raised his hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with reverent delicacy. "And I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try. Every day, I'll try to be the man you and Alexander deserve." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Kevin?" But before she could finish, one of Alexander's monitors emitted a soft beep. Not an alarm, just an automatic adjustment. Both turned immediately, the moment broken, but not forgotten. Julia got up to check, and Kevin followed her, standing behind her as she looked at the numbers on the screen. "Everything's fine," she said, relieved. "Everything's fine," Kevin echoed, but his hands found her waist, just holding lightly. She didn't pull away. And when Julia leaned back, allowing her back to rest against his chest, Kevin closed his eyes and simply felt. This was his place now, here, with them, and he was never leaving again. The bomb dropped on a Friday morning when the sun finally decided to appear after days of grey rain. Kevin was bringing coffee for Julia. He already knew exactly how she liked it. Medium, 2 spoons of sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, when he found her sitting on the sofa bed, her phone against her ear, her face tense. "Yes, Mom. I know. No, I haven't decided yet. Look, I have to go. I'll call you later." She hung up and put the phone aside, rubbing her temples with tired fingers. "Everything okay?" Kevin asked, handing her the coffee. Julia accepted the cup but didn't drink immediately. Instead, she looked at him with an expression Kevin couldn't decipher. Determination mixed with something that looked like guilt. "My mum called," she began slowly. "She's in Portland now, you know. She moved there 6 months ago to be close to my sister." Kevin nodded, an uncomfortable feeling settling in his stomach. And she suggested that when Alexander gets discharged, I could go there too. Julia finally met his eyes. "She has a big house, a yard, fresh air. Away from the craziness of New York, she can help me with the baby while I recover." Kevin's world stopped. "Portland, West Coast, 3,000 miles away. You're thinking about moving?" His voice came out colder than he intended, an automatic defense against the pain spreading in his chest like ink in water. "I'm thinking about considering my options," Julia corrected, but there was hesitation in her voice. "Kevin, raising a premature baby alone in New York isn't easy. I don't have family here, I don't have a real support network, and my mom—" "You have me." The words came out sharp, loaded with raw emotion. "Do I?" Julia put the coffee aside and stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "For how long, Kevin? A week? A month? Until the next billion-dollar deal that needs your attention? That's not fair. Isn't it?" She took a step toward him, her eyes shining with contained frustration. "We've been through this before. You promise? You stay present for a while. And then something at work comes up and I'm alone again. I can't risk that with Alexander." Kevin felt anger rising, not directed at her, but at the situation, at his own past mistakes, at the fact that she had every reason not to trust him. "So you're just going to take my son to the other side of the country?" He heard the accusation in his own voice and hated it. "And without even consulting me? He's my son too." Julia's voice rose, then fell again when she remembered where they were. "And you gave up the right to be consulted when you signed those divorce papers, Kevin." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin ran his hand through his hair, trying to control the panic that threatened to consume him. He couldn't lose Alexander. He couldn't lose Julia. Not again. Not now that he finally understood what mattered. "I'll fight for him," Kevin said, his voice low but firm. "If you try to push me away from him, I'll fight for custody." Julia paled. "Are you threatening me? I'm protecting my right to be a father." But even as he said it, Kevin felt the betrayal in his own words. This wasn't the solution. This wasn't how he wanted things to be. "Typical," Julia said, laughing bitterly. "When you can't control something, you resort to power, to lawyers, to money. This isn't about money." "No?" She stared at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then what is it about, Kevin? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like a man who wants to have his son available when it's convenient, but without actually changing anything in his life." "I've changed everything," his voice echoed in the small space. A nurse passed by in the hallway and looked at them with disapproval. Kevin lowered his voice, but the intensity remained. "I cancelled meetings. I left deals waiting. I'm here every single day, Julia. What more do you want from me? I want to believe this will last." She was crying now, tears rolling freely. "I want to believe that when the novelty wears off, when the guilt fades, you'll still be here. But I was married to you, Kevin. I know how it works. You're good at grand gestures, but it's in the small moments, in the ordinary days, that you always failed. Each word was a knife, because it was true." And Kevin had no defense against the truth. He took a step toward her, but Julia stepped back, creating physical distance between them. It was as if the last few days, the connections they had rebuilt, the moments of shared intimacy, had never happened. "I need to think about what's best for Alexander," Julia said, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "And maybe that means distance, stability, a place where I have real support. You have support here." Kevin's voice was breaking now, anger giving way to desperation. "You have me. But for how long?" she asked again, softer this time, sadder. "How long until you realize that being a father interferes with your plans? How long until you resent us for keeping you trapped?" "Never." Kevin closed the distance between them in 2 steps, taking her shoulders gently but firmly, forcing her to look at him. "I'll never resent you. You're not a prison, Julia. You're the only real freedom I've ever known." They were so close now, closer than they'd been since the divorce, except for the stolen moments in recent days. Kevin could see every detail of her face, the freckles she always tried to cover with makeup, the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at 8, the lips he knew so well he still dreamed about them. "I'm scared," Julia whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so scared of believing in you again and being disappointed." "I know." Kevin slid his hands from her shoulders to her face, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "And you have every right to be scared. But Julia, don't push me away. Don't push our son away from me. Please." She closed her eyes, more tears escaping. "I don't know if I can do this again." "Then let me show you." Kevin leaned in, his forehead touching hers, their hearts beating so loud he was sure she could hear his. "Let me prove that this time is different, that I'm different. What if you're not?" The question was just a breath between them. "Then you remind me. You hold me accountable, you keep me honest." His lips were inches from hers now, so close he could feel her breath against his mouth. "But don't give up on us yet. Not without giving me a real chance." Julia opened her eyes and Kevin saw the war happening there. Love against fear, hope against despair, desire against self-protection. "I need to know you won't give up when it gets hard," she finally said. "Because it will get hard, Kevin. Sleepless nights, diapers, illness, constant sacrifices. It won't be glamorous. I don't want glamorous." Kevin slid his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a tear. "I want you. I want sleepless nights if it means being next to you. I want diapers and illness and sacrifices. I want it all, Julia. For the first time in my life, I want something more than success. I want a family." She let out a sob, part cry, part something that could be relief. "I called a lawyer yesterday," Kevin admitted, hating himself for it. "I asked about custody rights, shared custody agreements, and while he talked about courts and schedules and divided time," he shook his head. "All I could think was that this was wrong. Completely wrong. I don't want to fight against you in court, Julia. I want to fight with you, by your side like I should have from the beginning." Julia stared at him for a long moment, searching for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was just another performance. But all she found was raw truth and absolute vulnerability. "I'm not moving immediately," she finally said, her voice trembling. "But I'm also not promising I'll stay. I need to see, Kevin. I need to see if this is real." "It's real." He brought his face even closer, their lips almost touching. "Let me show you how real it is." The space between them vibrated with unresolved tension, with contained desire, with years of complicated love and pain. But before either could close the distance, an alarm sounded, sharp, urgent. Coming from Alexander's incubator, they separated instantly, running to the baby. A nurse was already entering, checking the monitors, verifying the tubes. "What's happening?" Julia asked, panic evident in her voice. "Oxygen saturation dropped," the nurse said calmly, adjusting settings. "He's okay, but we'll need to increase respiratory support." Kevin held Julia's hand as they watched the nurse work, their fingers intertwined with almost painful force. In that moment, all discussions about Portland, custody, and fear evaporated. All that mattered was the little being fighting to breathe. And when Alexander's saturation finally stabilized, when the nurse smiled and said everything was under control, Kevin looked at Julia and saw the same truth reflected in her eyes. They needed each other, and more importantly, Alexander needed them both. Together. Monday began like every other day since Alexander's birth. Kevin arrived at the hospital at 6 in the morning with coffee and fresh bagels, finding Julia already awake, sitting beside the incubator, humming softly a lullaby he didn't recognize. The tension between them since the discussion about Portland still hung in the air like morning fog, but they had reached a silent agreement. Focus on Alexander. Leave the difficult decisions for later. Just be present in the moment. But at 9:37 in the morning, everything changed. Kevin was in the cafeteria getting more coffee when his cell phone rang. It was Julia, and something in her tone, high-pitched, tight, on the edge of panic, made his blood freeze. "Kevin, come back now. Something's wrong with Alexander." He dropped the coffee, not even caring when the hot liquid splashed on his hand, and ran through the hospital corridors. People moved out of his way, seeing the expression on his face. When he reached the NICU, there were 3 doctors and 2 nurses around Alexander's incubator. Julia was pressed against the wall, her face white as paper, her hands shaking violently. "What happened?" Kevin reached her, taking her frozen hands in his. "He stopped breathing on his own," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the medical team working on their son. "The alarm went off and I couldn't do anything, Kevin. I could only stand there watching while they—" Her voice broke completely, and she collapsed against him, sobs shaking her entire body. Kevin held her firmly, one hand on the back of her head, the other around her waist, but his eyes were glued to the incubator where his tiny son was surrounded by competent hands and noisy machines. Dr. Patel approached a few minutes later, her face serious. Kevin felt Julia stiffen in his arms. "Alexander has developed a serious complication," the doctor explained, her voice calm but grave. "Necrotizing enterocolitis. It's a condition where the intestinal tissue becomes inflamed and begins to die. It's relatively common in premature babies, but it needs to be treated immediately." "What does that mean?" Kevin asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "It means we need to perform emergency surgery to remove the affected part of the intestine." Dr. Patel looked between the two of them. "It's a delicate surgery. He's very small, very fragile. There are significant risks." Kevin's world tilted. Significant risks. The words echoed in his mind like church bells tolling a funeral. "What are the chances?" Julia asked, her voice so low it was barely audible. Dr. Patel hesitated, a pause that said more than any words could. "In babies his size, with his degree of prematurity, I'd say there's a 60% chance of complete success." 60%, which meant a 40% chance of... Kevin couldn't even complete the thought. "When?" he asked. "Now. We're preparing the operating room. You have a few minutes with him before we take him." The doctor stepped away, giving them privacy. Kevin and Julia stood frozen, holding each other, neither able to move. "He's going to die," Julia whispered, and hearing the words out loud was like being stabbed. "My baby is going to die, and I didn't even have time to really know him." "No." Kevin turned her to face him, holding her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. "No, Julia, he's not going to die. He's strong. He's our son. He's going to fight and he's going to win. You can't promise that." Tears ran freely down her face now. "You can't control this, Kevin. All your money, all your power. It means nothing here. We're just helpless." And that was the hardest truth of all. Kevin Montgomery, who had built an empire, who commanded boardrooms, who moved millions with a signature, was completely helpless to save his own son. "Then we pray," he said, surprising himself. He wasn't religious, never had been, but in that moment, he would have done anything, for a chance to keep Alexander alive. They approached the incubator together. Alexander was unconscious, sedated for surgery, his tiny body covered in wires and tubes. He looked even smaller than before, if that was possible. Julia placed her hand through the opening, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Mommy loves you so much," she whispered, her voice choked. "You need to fight, my love. You need to come back to me." Kevin placed his hand beside hers, his large fingers looking grotesque next to Alexander's fragile little head. "Daddy loves you too, champ, and we'll be here waiting when you come out, both of us together." Julia looked at him, and Kevin saw something change in her eyes. The anger, the resentment, the distance. It all melted away, leaving only raw fear and desperate need not to be alone. "I can't do this alone," she admitted, breaking completely. "You're not alone." Kevin pulled her to him, one hand on the back of her head, the other tracing calming circles on her back. I'm here, I promise, Julia. I'm not going anywhere. They stayed like that until the medical team came for Alexander. They watched as the incubator was disconnected and prepared for transport. Julia sobbed when they took him away, and Kevin had to hold her so she wouldn't run after them. "He'll come back," Kevin whispered against her hair repeatedly, like a mantra. "He'll come back to us." The surgical waiting room was a sterile space of white walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs. There were other people there, other parents in their own private nightmares, but Kevin barely registered them. He and Julia sat side by side, initially with some space between them. But as the minutes dragged like hours, they gradually moved closer until there was no space at all. Julia was nestled against him, her head on his shoulder, her whole body occasionally trembling with silent sobs. Kevin kept one arm firmly around her, his other hand holding hers, fingers intertwined. He pressed his lips against the top of her head repeatedly, not kisses exactly, more like silent prayers transferred through touch. "I should have noticed earlier," Julia murmured after an hour. "He was quieter this morning. I should have called someone." "No." Kevin squeezed her tighter. "This isn't your fault. You couldn't have known." "I'm his mother. I should have known." "Julia, look at me." Kevin waited until she raised her face, red and swollen eyes meeting his. "You're an incredible mother. You've been by his side every second since he was born. You loved him, cared for him, fought for him. Nothing that's happening is your fault." "What if I lose him?" The question came out as a broken moan. "What if my last memory of him is putting him in that incubator and watching him be taken away? Then we deal with it together." Kevin touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her wet cheek. "But he'll come back, Julia. I feel it. He's going to fight and he's going to come back. You can't know that." "No, I can't." Kevin pressed his forehead to hers, closing his eyes. "But I choose to believe. And I need you to believe too. For him." Julia nodded weakly, and they returned to the heavy silence of waiting. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Kevin called his assistant and cancelled the entire week. He ignored 12 calls from business partners. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was in an operating room fighting for his life. Julia eventually fell asleep against him, exhausted from emotion. Kevin didn't move, even when his arm began to tingle, even when his back ached from the uncomfortable position. He simply held her, fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm, lips occasionally pressing against her hair. As he held her, Kevin allowed himself to feel everything he had pushed down for years. Regret for all the times he chose work over her. Guilt for not being there when she found out about the pregnancy. Fear that it was already too late to fix everything that had broken between them. But he also felt something else, something he had never fully allowed before. Love. Not the superficial kind he thought was enough during the marriage, but deep, sacrificial love, the kind that said, "I choose you above everything, always." At 3:47 p.m., Dr. Patel finally appeared. Kevin gently shook Julia. "Love, wake up. The doctor's here." Julia woke instantly, on her feet before she was even fully conscious. "Alexander?" Dr. Patel smiled. Tired, but she smiled. "The surgery was successful. We removed the affected portion of the intestine. He's stable." Julia collapsed. Her legs simply gave out, and Kevin caught her before she fell, holding her as she cried. Great sobs of relief that shook her entire body. "He's alive," she repeated through tears. "He's alive." "He is," Kevin confirmed, his own voice breaking. He was crying too, he realized, silent tears rolling down his face as he held Julia, as he thanked everything and everyone who might be listening. "You can see him in about an hour," Dr. Patel continued. "He's still under anesthesia, but stable. The next few days will be critical, but he fought well. Your son is a warrior." When the doctor left, Kevin and Julia stood together in the middle of the waiting room, clinging to each other, both crying with relief. "I wouldn't have survived this alone," Julia whispered against his chest. "Thank you for staying." "Always," Kevin replied, kissing the top of her head. A real kiss this time, tender and promising. "Forever, Julia. I'll stay forever." And in that moment, they both understood something fundamental had changed between them. The wall they had built was crumbling, and maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Alexander survived the surgery, but the days that followed were the hardest. His tiny body struggled to recover, and the doctors warned that the next 72 hours would be decisive. Infections were common after such invasive surgeries in such premature babies. Each hour that passed without fever, without complications, was a small victory. Kevin and Julia practically lived at the hospital now. They had established an unspoken routine, taking turns between watching Alexander and trying to rest on the uncomfortable sofa bed. But more often than not, they ended up together, two exhausted bodies sharing the same small space, finding comfort in each other's presence. It was Wednesday, 3 days after the surgery, when Kevin's phone rang at 2 in the morning. He was lying on the sofa bed, Julia nestled against his chest, both dressed but barefoot, covered by a thin hospital blanket. She had cried herself to sleep an hour earlier, and Kevin was finally starting to relax when the phone's vibration broke the silence. He grabbed the device quickly, trying not to wake Julia. The name on the screen made his stomach tighten. Marcus Chen, his senior partner and best friend since college days. Kevin slid carefully out of bed, covering Julia again before stepping into the hallway. "Marcus," he answered, keeping his voice low. "It's 2 in the morning. I know what time it is." Marcus's voice was tense, loaded with urgency. "Kevin, we need to talk now. It's not a good time. I know about the baby, and I'm sorry, man, really, but this can't wait." Marcus paused. "The Asian investors are pulling the plug." Kevin felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. The Asian investors, a consortium of businessmen from Shanghai and Tokyo, represented the biggest deal in his company's history. $2 billion. It would expand their operations throughout Asia. It was the kind of deal that defined careers, that transformed successful companies into global empires. "Why?" Kevin asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because you disappeared, Kevin." The frustration was evident in Marcus's voice. "You cancelled 3 consecutive meetings. You didn't respond to critical emails. Mr. Tanaka flew from Tokyo specifically to meet with you last week, and you didn't even show up. They think you're not committed." "My son went through life-threatening emergency surgery," Kevin said, anger beginning to boil. "What was I supposed to do? Leave him alone to impress investors? No, that's not what I'm saying." Marcus sighed heavily. "Look, I understand. You have a family situation. But Kevin, this is $2 billion. This is the company's future. It's not just about you. It's about all the people who work for us, all the investors who trusted you." Kevin closed his eyes, leaning against the cold hallway wall. He could feel the crossroads forming beneath his feet. To the left, the empire he had built with blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. To the right, the family he had barely begun to know. "What do they want?" he finally asked. "A meeting. Tomorrow. Actually, today. At 9 a.m. At the office. In person. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Wang will be there. It's your last chance to save the deal, Kevin. If you don't show up..." Marcus didn't need to finish the sentence. Kevin looked through the hallway window, seeing the city beginning to wake below. Lights turning on in distant buildings, the world continuing its ruthless rotation. "I need to think," Kevin said. "There's no time to think. I need an answer now to confirm with them." "Marcus." "Kevin, listen." Marcus's voice softened. "I know you're going through something difficult, but you've worked your entire life to get here. You built this from scratch. Don't throw it all away for an emotional impulse." For an emotional impulse. The words echoed in Kevin's mind. Was that how Marcus saw it? How everyone would see it? A man having a midlife crisis, letting reason be eclipsed by temporary feelings. But when Kevin looked back at the door to the room where Julia slept, where Alexander fought for every breath in the NICU, he knew it wasn't impulse. It was the clearest decision he had made in years. "No," Kevin said simply. Silence on the other end of the line. "No what?" Marcus finally asked. "I'm not going to the meeting." "Kevin, are you crazy? This is $2 billion. I know." Kevin stepped away from the wall, standing straighter. "And normally, I'd be there. Normally, I would have found a way to do both, the meeting and the hospital. But Marcus..." He paused, feeling the weight of truth. "My son almost died 3 days ago. He's still in critical care. My ex-wife, the woman I still love, is falling apart trying to stay strong. And if I leave now, if I choose that meeting instead of being here, Kevin shook his head, even knowing Marcus couldn't see him. I'd lose the only thing that really matters. You're throwing away years of work, Marcus said, his voice hard now. No, I'm choosing something better. They'll cancel the deal. Then let them cancel it. Kevin, tell them I'm sorry, that I value the relationship. But my son needs me right now, and there's no amount of money in the world worth more than that. Kevin felt a strange lightness settling in his chest. If they can't understand that, then they're not the kind of partners I want anyway. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost admiring. You really have changed. Yes, Kevin admitted. I have changed. After hanging up, Kevin stood in the hallway for a few more minutes processing what he had just done. He had just thrown away potentially the biggest deal of his career. His partners would be furious. The board would question his judgment. There could be serious consequences for the company. But when he returned to the room and saw Julia still sleeping, her face finally relaxed in rest and looked through the window to the NICU where Alexander was fighting. Kevin felt no regret. He felt peace. For the first time in his adult life, Kevin Montgomery had chosen people over profit, love over legacy, and it was the easiest and hardest decision he had ever made. He lay down again beside Julia, carefully pulling her back against his chest. She murmured something unintelligible, instinctively nestling closer. Kevin kissed the top of her head, breathing in the smell of hospital shampoo and something uniquely her. I choose you, he whispered against her hair. I'll always choose you. Julia woke when the sun began to stream through the window. She blinked slowly, disoriented for a moment, before realizing she was practically lying on top of Kevin. She started to pull away, but he kept his arm around her. Good morning, he said softly. Sorry, I didn't mean to invade your space, Julia murmured, her cheeks flushing slightly. You're never invading. Kevin hesitated, then decided to tell her. Marcus called in the middle of the night. Julia was immediately alert, sitting up. Is everything okay with the company? Depends on how you define okay. Kevin smiled wryly. The Asian investors want to cancel the $2 billion deal because I haven't been available. Julia's face paled. Kevin, you need to go. You need to fix this. No. What? I said no. Kevin sat up, taking her hands. They wanted a meeting this morning. I refused. But that's your company, your dream. You worked years for this, and I'd work more years if it meant not losing this here. Kevin squeezed her hands. Julia, I spent so much time chasing the next deal, the next achievement, that I lost everything really worth having. I lost you. I almost lost the chance to know my son. I'm not making the same mistake again. Tears welled in her eyes. Kevin, you can't give up everything for us. I'm not giving up. I'm choosing. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what really matters, and that's you. You two. Always. Julia covered her mouth with her hand, tears rolling freely now. But you'll regret it. You'll resent us for making you lose this. Never. Kevin pulled her closer, framing her face with both hands. The only regret I have is not doing this sooner, not choosing you when we were still married, not realizing that you, not the money, not the success, you were my greatest treasure. Kevin, her voice broke completely. I love you, Julia. The words came out naturally, without hesitation, true as breathing. I've always loved you. Even when we signed those papers, even during all these months apart, I never stopped. And now with Alexander, he shook his head, marveling. You two are my life now, my real empire. And there's no meeting, no deal, no amount of money worth more than being here with you. Julia threw her arms around him, holding him tight as she cried against his neck. Kevin enveloped her completely, one hand on the back of her head, the other on her back, keeping her as close as possible. I never wanted your money, she sobbed. I just wanted you to choose me. And now I choose, Kevin whispered against her hair. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you. They stayed like that for long minutes, holding each other as the morning sun filled the room with golden light. And when they finally separated, Julia looked at him with something in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Real, true, uncautious hope. "Let's go see our son," she said, wiping her tears but smiling. "Yes," Kevin agreed, kissing her forehead gently. "Let's go see our son." And as they walked hand in hand toward the NICU, Kevin knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right decision. Some empires are built with money, but the best ones are built with love. 3 weeks after the surgery, Alexander was finally truly improving. His oxygen saturation had stabilized, he was gaining weight, precious grams that made Julia cry with relief each time the nurses updated the numbers. The doctors began talking about discharge soon, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. For the first time since his birth, they could breathe. Kevin had transformed this renewed hope into action. While Julia spent her days with Alexander, he briefly left to handle practical matters. He found an apartment, not in Tribeca, where his minimalist and cold place was, but in Brooklyn in Park Slope. A family neighborhood, trees lining the sidewalks, parks nearby. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, lots of natural light, and a kitchen where he could imagine making Sunday breakfast while Julia held Alexander. He furnished everything. He bought a crib after reading 17 articles about infant safety. He installed a changing table. He filled the closets with tiny clothes, diapers, wipes, everything maternity websites said was essential. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, when Alexander was particularly stable and alert, Kevin asked the question. "Come with me tonight," he said to Julia, who was humming softly to the baby through the incubator opening. She looked at him, surprised. "Where?" "It's a surprise, but—" Kevin hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I prepared something. For us. And I think you need a night away from here. Just a few hours." Julia bit her lip, looking at Alexander. "I don't know if I can leave him. The nurses have my number. The apartment is 20 minutes from here. If anything happens, we'll be back in an instant." Kevin approached, taking her hand. "Please, Julia, trust me." There were so many layers to that request. "Trust me to take care of you. Trust me to keep you safe. Trust me not to disappoint you again." Julia looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." 2 hours later, Kevin was driving through Brooklyn streets while Julia looked out the window, watching the neighborhood change from industrial to residential. Trees lined the streets, charming brownstones with stone steps, families walking with baby strollers. "Where are we going?" she asked, but there was a smile playing on her lips. "Patience," Kevin replied, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. When he parked in front of a 4-story building with a brick facade and arched windows, Julia frowned. "Here?" "Here." Kevin got out and opened her door, offering his hand. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. The apartment was on the top floor. Kevin unlocked the door, but before opening it completely, he turned to Julia. "Before we go in, I want you to know this isn't pressure. It's not a trap. It's just a possibility. Okay?" Julia nodded, curiosity evident in her eyes. Kevin opened the door. The apartment was bathed in golden late-afternoon light. Hardwood floors, white walls, huge windows with views of trees and rooftops. The living room had a comfortable cream-colored sofa, a bookshelf already beginning to be filled. But what made Julia catch her breath was what she saw through the open door of the 2nd bedroom. A white crib, walls painted soft blue, a nursing chair near the window, animal mobiles hanging, shelves with children's books, a nursery. "Kevin," her voice failed. "I bought it for you," he said softly, standing behind her as she walked slowly through the apartment, touching things with reverence. "If you want, no pressure. But I thought when Alexander gets discharged, you'd need a place. And I wanted it to be a place where I could be too, not as a visitor. He swallowed hard. "As a family." Julia turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. "You did all this?" "I had help. An interior designer who was very patient with a man who didn't know the difference between beryl and seafoam when it comes to shades of blue." Kevin tried to make a joke, but his voice was thick with emotion. Julia let out a wet laugh, wiping her tears. She continued exploring. The kitchen with new appliances, the bathroom with a large tub, the master bedroom with a king-size bed and pristine white sheets. "There's one more thing," Kevin said, guiding her to the balcony accessed from the master bedroom. Outside, there was a small table set for two, candles already lit, despite it still being late afternoon, white wine in an ice bucket, and the view was breathtaking. The sun setting over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and purple. "Kevin," Julia covered her mouth, too moved to speak. "I thought we could have dinner together," he said softly, "like we used to, before everything fell apart." She turned to him and Kevin saw everything on her face. Surprise, gratitude, love, fear, hope, all mixed in an expression that made his heart tighten. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. "Because I love you." Simple, direct, true. Because I want a second chance. Because I want to build a life with you and Alexander. Because, he took a step closer, because without you, none of this means anything. Julia let out a sob, and then she was in his arms, kissing him. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of months of longing and pain and unresolved love. Her lips were wet with tears but warm, so perfectly familiar that Kevin felt something inside him click back into place. He pulled her closer, one hand tangled in her hair, the other on her back, feeling every curve he had memorized years ago. Julia held his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, as if she needed to confirm he was real. When they separated to breathe, they stayed with foreheads touching, panting. "I still love you," Julia whispered, the words coming out like a confession. "God, Kevin, I never stopped. Even when I hated you, I still loved you." "I know." He kissed her cheek, then the corner of her mouth. "I know because I felt the same." They had dinner on the balcony, while the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Something rare to see in New York. But there, that night, they seemed to shine just for them. The food was delicious. Kevin had ordered from an Italian restaurant Julia loved, but neither paid much attention to what they ate. They were too busy looking at each other, touching occasionally, fingers brushing when passing the wine, knees touching under the table, glances that lasted much longer than friends or ex-spouses should exchange. After dinner, Julia was standing near the balcony railing, looking at the lit city, when Kevin approached from behind. He hesitated for just a moment before wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her against his chest. Julia leaned into him immediately, her head resting on his shoulder, her hands covering his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all this, for choosing us. Always," Kevin replied, pressing his lips gently against her neck. Julia shivered, slowly turning in his arms until they were face to face. She was wearing a simple blouse. He had brought clean clothes for her earlier, and jeans, but to Kevin she had never looked more beautiful. "Kevin." She touched his face, her fingers tracing his features as if memorizing them again. "I want to believe this will work. That we'll work. Then believe." He covered her hand with his, turning to kiss her palm. "Let me show you." She didn't need to ask what he meant. The answer was in his eyes, in the way he held her, in the growing tension between them. Julia rose on her tiptoes, pulling him into another kiss, slower this time, more intentional. Their mouths moved together in an ancient and familiar dance, rediscovering what they never really forgot. Kevin guided her inside, closing the balcony door behind them. They walked to the bedroom, stopping every few steps for more kisses, more touches, more whispers of, "I love you, and I want you, and I'll never let you go again." In the bedroom, moonlight streamed through the windows, bathing everything in a silver glow. Kevin stopped beside the bed, holding Julia's face with both hands. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving her an out, always giving her the choice. "I'm sure," Julia replied, and then she was unbuttoning his shirt, revealing the chest she knew so well. They undressed slowly, each piece of clothing a revelation. Kevin traced his fingers along her shoulders, down her arms, worshipping every inch. Julia explored his chest, feeling his heart beating hard beneath her palm. When they finally lay together on the bed, skin against skin, it was like coming home. Kevin kissed every part of her, her face, neck, shoulders. His hands explored with reverence, rediscovering curves, coaxing sighs. Julia arched against him, her fingers tracing the muscles of his back, pulling him closer. "I missed you so much," Kevin whispered against her skin, between kisses. "Me too," Julia moaned when his mouth found a sensitive spot on her neck. "God, Kevin, me too." Their bodies fit together naturally, as if made for this. The movements were slow, deliberate, each savoring the other. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, the union of two people who had lost and found each other again. Kevin held her face as they moved together, his eyes never leaving hers. He wanted her to see how much he loved her, how much this meant, how much he would never let her go again. "I love you," he whispered, kissing her deeply. "I've always loved you." "I love you," Julia replied, clinging to him as sensations intensified. "Kevin, They reached the peak together, holding each other as waves of pleasure swept over them. And afterward, lying intertwined, sweaty and breathless, Julia began to cry softly. "Hey!" Kevin whispered, alarmed, turning her to face him. "What's wrong? Did I hurt you?" "No." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "It's just that I forgot what this was like. What it was like to be loved by you. To be chosen." Kevin wiped the tears, kissing each one. "You were always chosen, Julia. I was just too much of an idiot to show it. But now..." He pulled her closer, enveloping her completely. "Now you'll have to tell me to stop choosing you, because I won't do it on my own." Julia laughed, a wet but genuinely happy sound. She nestled against him, her head on his chest, listening to his heart beating hard. "I want to sleep with you every night," Kevin said quietly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to make breakfast while you hold Alexander. I want arguments about what show to watch and who forgot to close the toothpaste. I want it all, Julia. All the beautiful, ordinary mess of a life together." "Then don't stop choosing me," Julia whispered back. "No matter what, don't stop." "Never," Kevin promised, kissing the top of her head. "Forever." They fell asleep like that, intertwined, safe, finally home in each other's arms. And for the first time in a long time, both slept without nightmares, only dreams of possible futures and reborn loves. The days following that night at the apartment were different. Not dramatically. Alexander was still in the hospital, the monitors still beeped constantly, the nurses still made their hourly rounds. But there was a new lightness between Kevin and Julia, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from both their shoulders. They no longer hid their touches. His hand found her waist naturally when they passed each other in the hospital's narrow hallways. She leaned against him as they watched Alexander sleep, her head resting on his shoulder without hesitation. Kisses became common, quick and soft when nurses weren't looking, more lingering when they were alone in the waiting room late at night. The nurses noticed. Of course they noticed. They exchanged knowing smiles and whispered among themselves about the couple from Incubator 7 who finally got it together. No one commented directly, but there was a collective warmth in the air, as if the entire NICU was rooting for their romance. It was on a Tuesday, almost 5 weeks after Alexander's birth, that Dr. Patel gave the news that would change everything. "Alexander is ready to go home." Julia covered her mouth, tears instantly filling her eyes. Kevin simply stood still for a moment, processing, before a huge smile spread across his face. "When?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "This weekend. We want to monitor him for a few more days, make sure he's gaining weight consistently, but..." The doctor smiled warmly. "Your son is a fighter, he's ready." After Dr. Patel left, Kevin and Julia looked at each other across Alexander's incubator, now awake, his tiny eyes open in curious slits, observing the world with surprising intensity for someone so small. "He's coming home," Julia whispered, amazed. "He's coming home," Kevin echoed. And then he was around the incubator, pulling Julia into his arms, spinning her while she laughed and cried at the same time. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of preparations. Kevin made 3 trips to the apartment, bringing more things, reorganizing the baby's room for the 10th time, making sure everything was perfect. Julia, finally officially discharged from the hospital as a patient, went with him on one of these trips. It was the first time she saw the apartment in daylight. "Kevin," she stopped at the entrance to Alexander's room, one hand over her heart. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the soft blue walls, making the animal mobiles cast dancing shadows. There was a dresser with a changing table already filled with clothes organized by size, a nursing chair near the window with a soft blanket thrown over it, shelves with children's books, some classics, some new. "You organized by size," she observed, opening a drawer and seeing tiny onesies perfectly folded. "I read it was more efficient." Kevin stood in the doorway watching her explore. "And I marked the labels with ages. Newborn, 3 months, 6 months. Julia turned to him, her eyes shining. "You really thought of everything." "I tried." He entered the room, standing behind her. "I want you to feel at home here, Julia, both of you." She leaned against him and Kevin wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. They stayed like that for a moment, just absorbing. The room that would soon be filled with baby cries and diaper changes and lullabies at 3 in the morning. "There's something I want to show you," Kevin finally said, taking her hand. He guided her to the master bedroom, but instead of stopping there, he opened a door she hadn't noticed before, a small office with a desk near the window, empty shelves waiting to be filled. "I thought you might need a space," Kevin explained. "To work. To create. I know you were working on that curation project before and before everything happened." Julia looked at him surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you, Julia." "I always have." Kevin leaned against the desk. "And I know that during our marriage you gave up a lot of things. Your career, your projects, your dreams. Because I was so focused on mine that I didn't leave room for yours." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But that's not going to happen this time. I want you to pursue your passions. I want to support you the way I should have from the beginning." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Kevin, taking care of a newborn is a full-time job. I can't just—" "We'll figure it out together." He approached, taking her hands. "Maybe you work part-time. Maybe I work part-time. Maybe we get help. But Julia, you're not going to lose yourself again." "I won't let that happen," Julia sobbed, throwing her arms around him. "How did you become so perfect?" "I'm not perfect," Kevin laughed softly, holding her tight. "I'm still going to mess things up. I'm still going to forget to take out the trash or leave dishes in the sink. But—" He pulled her back enough to look in her eyes. "But I won't forget what matters, not again." It was in that moment, standing in that small, sun-drenched office, that Julia fully understood. He had truly changed. The man she had married 5 years ago was there, somewhere beneath the surface, but this Kevin was deeper, more aware, more complete. "I have something for you too," Julia said suddenly, pulling away from him and grabbing the bag she'd left in the living room. She came back holding a small worn notebook, the kind artists use for sketches. She handed it to Kevin with slightly trembling hands. "What's this?" he asked, but was already opening it. Page after page of drawings. Sketches of Alexander, sleeping, crying, gripping tiny fingers. Drawings of the hospital, the incubator, the nurses. And in the middle there were drawings of Kevin, sitting beside the incubator, his head bowed as he held his son's hand, standing near the window, looking at the city, sleeping on the uncomfortable sofa bed, his face finally relaxed. "You drew me," Kevin said, his voice amazed. "I drew a lot of things at the hospital. When I couldn't sleep, when I was too anxious to just sit still." Julia bit her lip. "And I kept drawing you. I couldn't stop. You were always there, you know? Always present. Always choosing to stay." Kevin looked at her, raw emotion stamped on his face. "Can I keep this?" "It's yours, it always was." He kissed her then, slow, deep, full of promises and gratitude. And when they separated, both were smiling. On Friday, the day before Alexander's discharge, Kevin took Julia to lunch. Not to a fancy restaurant. He had learned she didn't care about that. Instead, they went to a small Brooklyn cafe that served the best Cuban sandwiches in the city. They sat at a corner table, sunlight streaming through the dirty window, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filling the air. "There's something I want to ask you," Kevin said after they finished eating. Julia looked at him, curious. "Okay, I want you to work with me." Seeing her confused expression, he quickly clarified. Not at the company. I mean, I'm starting a foundation, Arts and Education for Children from Underserved Communities, and I need someone to lead the artistic side, curate exhibitions, develop programs. He took her hand across the table. And I don't know anyone more qualified or passionate about art than you. Julia blinked, processing. You're offering me a job? I'm offering a partnership. This would be yours, Julia. Your vision, your decisions. I'd just finance it and handle the boring administrative side. Kevin smiled. And before you ask, and no, this isn't charity, it's trust. I trust your talent. I always have. Kevin, it's amazing. Julia was laughing, her eyes shining. But with Alexander, I don't know if I can... Flexible hours, remote work when necessary, daycare at the office. Kevin had thought of everything. And for the first few months, you don't need to do anything. Just think about it. When you're ready. Julia squeezed his hand, too moved to speak. Finally, she managed to say, yes, I want to do this. Yes? Kevin's smile was radiant. Yes! Julia laughed, and then she was standing, pulling him into a kiss, right there in the middle of the cafe, not caring who was watching. When they returned to the hospital that night, everything felt different, brighter, more full of possibilities. They sat together beside Alexander's incubator for the last night. Tomorrow he would be home in their arms in their apartment, beginning a real life outside these sterile white walls. Ready for this? Julia asked softly, watching Kevin trace gentle fingers on Alexander's arm through the opening. Terrified, Kevin admitted with a smile. But yes, ready. Me too. Julia rested her head on his shoulder. Terrified and ready. Kevin kissed the top of her head, then whispered to Alexander, Tomorrow, little one. Tomorrow, you meet your home. And your family finally begins. Alexander seemed to hear him. His little eyes opened briefly, looking up, and Kevin swore he saw the beginning of a smile. His son, his family, his future. Finally, everything was falling into place. 6 months later, autumn painted Brooklyn in shades of gold and red, leaves dancing on the sidewalks of Park Slope, while the fresh October wind carried the smell of apples and cinnamon from local bakeries. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of perfect day that seemed straight out of a movie. Clear blue sky, soft sun, the whole world shining with possibilities. Kevin was in the apartment kitchen making pancakes, not the pre-made kind. He had learned to make them from scratch, following a recipe Julia had stuck to the refrigerator. The house smelled of melting butter and vanilla, fresh coffee bubbling in the coffee maker. You're burning them again, Julia said behind him, laughing softly. He turned to see her standing in the kitchen entrance, wearing one of his shirts. It was big on her, falling to mid-thigh, the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was messy from sleep, her face free of makeup, and to Kevin, she had never looked more beautiful. I'm not burning them, he protested, but quickly flipped the pancake that was, in fact, starting to darken too much around the edges. Julia approached, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her face against his back. Liar. Kevin smiled, placing his hand over hers. Is Alexander still sleeping? Miraculously, yes. Julia kissed his back through the t-shirt. I took advantage and showered. First unhurried shower in 3 days. Kevin turned in her arms, pulling her closer. So we have... He looked at the clock. Maybe 20 minutes before he wakes up and demands breakfast too. If we're lucky. Julia smiled, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. What do you want to do with 20 minutes? Kevin turned off the stove, pulling her even closer, his hands sliding down her waist. I have some ideas. She laughed against his lips, but before they could go any further, a familiar cry echoed through the apartment. Or maybe 10 minutes, Julia corrected, pulling away with a dramatic sigh. Kevin followed her to Alexander's room, where their son, now almost 9 pounds, with chubby cheeks and bright blue eyes that were exact copies of Kevin's, was waking up in his crib, waving his arms and legs with growing indignation. Good morning, my love, Julia sang, picking him up. Alexander immediately calmed down, nestling against her chest. Kevin stood in the doorway, watching, a scene that repeated every morning, but still made his heart tighten, his family, his real life. "Breakfast?" he offered. "Breakfast," Julia agreed, following him back to the kitchen. They settled into a comfortable routine, Kevin finishing the pancakes while Julia fed Alexander, the three eventually gathering at the small dining table near the window. Sunlight streamed in, warming the space, making everything glow. "So," Kevin said casually, but there was nervousness in his voice, "there's something I wanted to show you today." Julia looked at him over her coffee cup. "Another surprise? Maybe." He smiled mysteriously. "Do you trust me?" "Always," she replied, and she meant it, completely. 2 hours later, after dressing Alexander in an adorable onesie with bear ears on the hood, they were in Kevin's car driving through Brooklyn. Julia eventually recognized where they were going, back to Park Slope, but to a part she didn't know well. Kevin parked in front of a beautiful brownstone house. 3 stories, stone steps leading to a dark green door, tall windows with white shutters. There was a small front garden, flowers still blooming despite the season. "Kevin?" Julia turned to him, confusion and something that could be hope in her eyes. "What is this?" "Get out of the car," he said softly. He helped her take Alexander out of the car seat, and together they climbed the stairs. Kevin had keys, of course he did, and opened the door. The interior was stunning. Original hardwood floors, high ceilings with molding natural light streaming through every window. The living room was spacious with a brick fireplace. The kitchen had been renovated but maintained vintage charm, white cabinets, marble countertops, a large island perfect for preparing family meals. Julia walked slowly through the space, touching things with reverence. She went upstairs, discovering 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, a master with a private balcony, 2 smaller ones that would be perfect for children, and on the 3rd floor, a converted attic with skylights, bright and airy. "Kevin," she said when she came back down, finding him standing in the living room with Alexander in his arms. "What is this?" He took a step toward her, his eyes serious. "It's ours, if you want it." "Ours? I bought it. Well, I'm buying it. The deal closes next week." Kevin adjusted Alexander in his arm, using his free hand to take Julia's. "The apartment was temporary, it always was. But this is forever, Julia. Room to grow. A yard where Alexander can play. Rooms for more children if you want. A studio in the attic where you can work." Tears filled her eyes. "You bought a house." "I bought a house for us," Kevin corrected, pulling her closer. "Because I want to build a life with you here. I want Christmases around that fireplace. I want Thanksgiving dinners in that kitchen. I want to mark Alexander's height, our children's heights, on that wall there. I want everything, Julia, with you, Kevin." She was crying now, tears of pure joy rolling freely. "And there's one more thing." Kevin took a deep breath. Then, with Alexander still in his arm, he got down on one knee. Julia's world stopped. "I don't have a ring yet," Kevin began, his voice thick with emotion, "because I wanted you to choose. I wanted it to be exactly what you want. But Julia," he looked at her with so much love she could barely breathe, "I love you. I love you with every part of who I am. You made me a better man. You taught me what really matters. You gave me this incredible gift." He looked at Alexander, then back at her. "And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." "Kevin," Julia sobbed, falling to her knees in front of him. "Marry me," he said simply. "Again. The right way this time. Let me be your real husband. Let me wake up beside you every day. Let me build a family with you. Let me love you the way I always should have." "Yes," Julia answered without hesitation, throwing her arms around him and Alexander, creating a family bubble. "Yes, yes, yes," Kevin laughed, holding them both, kissing Julia deeply while Alexander gurgled between them, apparently approving of the whole situation. "I love you," Kevin whispered against her lips. "So much." "I love you," Julia replied, stroking his face. "And I love this, the house, the future, everything." They stayed like that for long moments, kneeling on the floor of what would be their home, holding each other and their son, while the afternoon sun painted everything in golden tones through the windows. Eventually, they got up and explored together. Julia imagined what each room would be. The master theirs, of course, a room for Alexander, and the third, maybe for a brother or sister in the future. The attic would be her studio, where she could work on the foundation she now led with renewed passion. In the backyard, because there was a backyard, fenced and perfect, Julia turned to Kevin. "How did you become so perfect?" she asked, echoing her words from months ago. "I'm not perfect," Kevin replied, pulling her to his free side, Alexander still happily in his other arm. "But I'm yours, completely, totally yours, and I'll spend every day proving this wasn't a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Julia said firmly. "It was a new beginning, a second chance we both deserved." They stood there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Alexander fell asleep in Kevin's lap, content and safe. And Kevin and Julia embraced, looking at the yard where one day they would have summer barbecues, where Alexander would take his first steps, where they would build memories enough for a lifetime. "Thank you," Julia whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up, for fighting for us, for choosing love over everything else." Kevin kissed the top of her head. "Best choice I ever made." And it was true. Every word. 6 months ago, Kevin Montgomery had everything. Money, power, success. But he was empty. Now standing in the yard of their future home, with the woman he loved in his arms and his son sleeping peacefully, he finally understood what it meant to truly have everything. It wasn't about empires built with deals. It was about families built with love. And this family, Julia and Alexander and the life they were creating together, was the greatest success he would ever achieve. The best was just beginning. And Kevin couldn't be more grateful for finally having learned to choose what really mattered. Love, family, home. Everything else was just noise. But this was real life. And it was absolutely perfect. Kevin and Julia proved that some loves don't die. They just wait for the right moment to be reborn. He learned that true power isn't in building empires, but in choosing who to love every day. She learned that second chances exist, but only when both are willing to rebuild on honest ruins. Alexander, unknowingly, was the catalyst that forced them to face what was always there, a love too deep to be erased by past mistakes. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this. It doesn't matter how many times you fall, it matters how many times you choose to get up and try again, with an open heart, vulnerable and brave. And you? When was the last time you chose love instead of fear? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you.